Week 11 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few plays I look to sell and trade this week. The first player, Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers. Chuba Hubbard, what a season it's been for him, no doubt about it. A few big games over the last couple weeks here, and now he really kicked it into gear after signing a contract extension last week as Chuba Hubbard. So the last two games, week 9 versus the Saints, 72 rush yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 catches in that ball game. And then week 10, a monster ball game in Germany versus the Giants, 153 yards rushing, a touchdown, 4 catches, 16 yards, and a fumble loss. So Chuba Hubbard playing great football for this Carolina Panther team. Got the big contract extension, but now we're going on bye week, and Jonathan Brooks returning off the injured reserve. A rookie they took in the second round was this Panther team. With this Panther team 3-7 on the season, I don't see Jonathan Brooks just sitting on the bench and Hubbard's still getting these 25, 30 touches a game. I think Brooks is going to work his way in. I think he's going to eat slowly into the workload of Chuba Hubbard, where I could see 5-10 touches per game. And then if he starts outperforming him as the weeks go on, I believe he's going to get even more work as Jonathan Brooks. And now with a bye week here in week 11, tough matchup in week 12 versus Kansas City. Pretty much the next 2 weeks, it's tough sledding for the Chuba Hubbard owner. So after coming off a monster performance, over 150 yards on the ground versus the New York Giants, he's definitely a sell-high player this week. The next sell, Calvin Ridley of the Tennessee Titans. I had Ridley as a sell last week, and once again, I'm going to go back to the well. I know Ridley had a monster game, 5 catches, 84 yards, and 2 touchdowns, but Will Levis's return to the lineup at the Chargers. But Calvin Ridley, he's just a wide receiver where we saw what he did early in the season. He didn't do anything. I know DeAndre Hopkins, he got traded a few weeks ago, obviously to the Kansas City Chiefs, and the snaps and the targets have gone up, obviously, for Calvin Ridley. But I just don't believe it's going to be sustainable for the remainder of the season. With teams, they're pretty much going to try to zero in on Calvin Ridley, garbage time or not. I just don't believe he's going to keep up numbers where the last 2 out of 3 games he's had 20 or more fantasy points. So right now, while he's playing great football, next week a tougher matchup versus the Minnesota Vikings. Calvin Ridley is a sell-high candidate. I'm not saying dump these players for anything, but definitely if I could trade them off and get something of value selling them high, this would be the time to do it, with actually most trade deadlines coming up in the next week or two anyway for fantasy owners. Next sell highs, Jackson Smith-Njigba, the Seattle Seahawks. I mentioned him last week. He was on bye week. In week 10 was Jackson Smith. Now he's back this week with a tougher matchup with the San Francisco 49ers. So Smith-Njigba, he's had some monster games, and some games we haven't seen much, but obviously the big game he popped off for 7 catches, 180 yards, and 2 touchdowns in week 9 versus the Rams on 13 targets. DK Metcalf was out in that one. I believe DK Metcalf will return in this ball game here in week 11 at the San Francisco 49ers. And like I said, with a tough matchup, and DK Metcalf returning most likely, I believe, off the sprained MCL. Targets are going to go down, and obviously the fantasy production follows with the snaps going down as well for JSN. So JSN, like I said, he's had a couple pop games here and there, but then there's also games we've seen this season where he disappears and he only gets 5-8 fantasy points. So right now, coming off that monster performance, and with Metcalf returning to the lineup sooner than later, he's definitely a sell-high player this week. The next sell, Kareem Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Hunt, he's filled in very nicely for Isaiah Pacheco over the last about 2 months of the season almost. We know Carson Steele got the first shot at it, but Kareem Hunt came in once Carson Steele had the fumble issues, and he took over the backfield over there for Kansas City. So the last 3 out of 4 games, he's had 15 or more fantasy points in PPR leagues. So week 11, a good matchup on paper. Buffalo, they give up the second most fantasy points to running backs on the season. But the thing is, Isaiah Pacheco, he could return in 2 or 3 weeks, and I don't believe Pacheco is going to be totally phased out, where this could be a 50-50 split. And we've seen Hunt over the last couple seasons with the Browns where he was in a 50-50 split, or even 60-40 where it was going Nick Chubb's way. His numbers weren't all that great, where he had to depend on a touchdown. So like I said, he's playing great football. The next 2 weeks, I believe he's still going to be the starter. And then I believe week 13, week 14, we'll see Isaiah Pacheco back in the lineup for this Kansas City Chiefs team. Obviously hurts fantasy owners in the playoff push, with playoff starting in most fantasy leagues in week 15. So right now, Kareem Hunt, great football he's playing. But like I said, with Pacheco returning possibly in the next 2 or 3 weeks, I would put Kareem Hunt on the trade block and see if anyone would bite and give you an overpay in a deal. Next player, Rashard White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Rashard White, one of his best games of the season. He's come off in the matchup versus the 49ers in Week 10. 31 rush yards, 6 catches, 39 yards, and a touchdown. So I've said this all season long, in between the tackles, Bucky Irvin is the better running back for this Tampa Bay Buck team. And Rashard White's one of the best receiving backs, no doubt about it, in all pro football. Out of 4 games, he's had 17 or more fantasy points in PPR leagues, so he's playing great football. No doubt about it, is Rashard White. But the thing is, they're going on by here in Week 11 is this Tampa Bay Buck team. And then Mike Evans most likely returning Week 12 at the Giants. So Mike Evans back in the lineup is going to be huge. He's going to take production away from everyone. And like I said, Bucky Irvin, he's better in between the tackles. And the next 2 games as well, at the New York Giants in Week 12 and Week 13 at Carolina. 2 games Tampa Bay should be up early and often, where they're going to run the football a little bit more, where those receptions and targets will go down for Rashard White. So coming off a nice last month of the season with all the injuries to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, who's out for the year, I think Rashard White, his numbers are going to go down, targets are going to go down, with Evans most likely returning in Week 12. The next play I look to sell is Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens. So Mark Andrews, he's definitely turned this season around over the last month of the season, where he's had double-digit fantasy points in the last 4 out of 5 games is Mark Andrews in PPR leagues, including a big game in Week 10 versus the Bengals. 6 catches, 68 yards, and a touchdown. So Week 11, going to be a physical matchup. Obviously, AFC North rivalry, Baltimore Ravens at the Steelers. And Mark Andrews, like I said, he's definitely turned the season around, but last game, Zay Flowers, he didn't do much. I believe he's going to bounce back. Deontay Johnson, they traded for him a couple weeks ago. I know he's frustrated, but I believe he's going to get into the playbook and get some things going for this Baltimore Raven team. So with all those factors, and obviously Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson just running at a great pace all season long, I think Andrews, the numbers going to go down a little bit. And also Isaiah Likely, he was out in the last game. So I think right now, after a big performance for Mark Andrews, he's a sell-high candidate this week. In the final play, I look to sell and trades Kyler Murray of the Arizona Cardinals. So Kyler Murray, it's been one great game, one bad game. It seems like the theme's been all season long. Now he's going on by in Week 11 here is Kyler Murray. And like I said, he's been playing good football for the most part, most weeks. But then there's some weeks he puts in stinkers, even I know the quarterback position. Besides Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Burrow, most quarterbacks have been inconsistent all season long. So the last few games for Murray, Week 8 in Miami, 307 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, 19 rush yards. Week 9 versus the Bears, 154 pass yards, 6 rush yards, a fumble loss. And then Week 10, the monster game versus the Jets, 266 passing, a touchdown, 21 rush yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns. So when Murray's at his best, he's using his legs, he's spreading the football out and making plays. But like I said, with him going on by and then going on the road for 2 games in Week 12 at Seattle and Week 13 in Minnesota, where his numbers definitely are off on the road compared to at home, I think this is a time to sell Murray high this week. So that's a few players I look to sell and trade for Week 11 of the fantasy football season, where most fantasy trade deadlines coming up this week or next week.